My husband got really mad when I laughed at a joke his sister made about his job. He barked, "You think you're better than me now?" I said, "No, but clearly she does." Later, I was invited to speak at her startup launch while he waited outside. Weeks later, he asked if I could get him a job there. "My name's Camille, I'm 42, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I used to be married to a man named Ronan. We were together for almost 2 decades, 17 years in total, married for 14 of those. We met in one of those cliché romantic settings, a jazz night downtown, back when I was still in grad school at Portland State University. I was working on my master's in communication and media, and he was already working full-time in logistics. That night, he told me he liked real music, and that women who read too much were matingy. I was hooked, naive, maybe, but hooked. Ronan had this rugged kind of charm. The kind that made him seem stable, grounded, a salt-of-the-earth type. He'd worked at a regional distribution warehouse for years, moving freight, managing trucks, doing the heavy lifting, both literally and, I thought, metaphorically in life too. He was proud of being blue-collar. Back then, I was too. We built a quiet little life in Selwood. It's a historic neighborhood in southeast Portland with tree-lined streets, family-owned coffee shops, and a kind of charm that makes you forget time is passing. We never had children, not by lack of trying, but because after several failed rounds of IVF, we decided to stop. That chapter closed, quietly, like a book you never finished reading. We filled our lives with work, our dogs, 2 pit mix rescues, and each other. Or at least, that's what I thought. I work in branding and communications. My career path was slow but steady. I started in corporate marketing, pivoted into consulting, and eventually built a name for myself advising tech startups on their brand narratives and human-centered messaging. It wasn't flashy, but it paid well and let me do what I loved, helping companies find their voice. Meanwhile, Ronan stayed exactly where he was. Same job. Same friends. Same weekend routines. He never wanted more. At first, I respected that. Not everyone's path is supposed to be a ladder. But over time, I realized he didn't just lack ambition, he resented mine. Then came the moment that changed everything. The moment that peeled the mask off our marriage like a scab that never healed right. We were at his sister's apartment in S.E. Hawthorne. Her name is Calla, 29, sharp as a whip, unapologetically driven. She's got that kind of brilliance that makes people uncomfortable, especially men like Ronan. She was hosting a small party, soft launch of her tech startup, a wellness meets AI journal app she'd spent 2 years building. 10 people, maybe less. Smart people. Creative types. The kind of folks Ronan always side-eyed. We were standing in her living room, sipping cheap red wine from stemless glasses. She was talking about stress, hustle culture, and how her app was designed to help people process daily emotions. Someone joked that if the app failed, she could always go work with her brother. She laughed and said, "Yeah, I'll just start tossing boxes around and pray for overtime like Ronan." It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even directed at him. It was a moment, a small, stupid moment, and I laughed. Just a chuckle. Not loud. Not pointed. But loud enough, apparently. Ronan's expression didn't change right away, but I felt the shift. I felt it in his silence, in the way he set his drink down with too much force. I didn't think much of it. I should have. We left about an hour later. He was quiet the whole ride home. The kind of quiet that coils like a spring. Then, in the driveway, engine still running, he finally snapped. "You think you're better than me now?" It came out like a punch. I turned to him, startled. "What are you talking about?" "You laughed. At that joke. She was mocking me, and you laughed." I stared at him, half confused, half exhausted. "She wasn't mocking you, Ronan. It was a joke." His voice rose. "She was mocking my job. And you laughed. You and your smug little startup crew." That word, smug, it hit wrong. Like it wasn't about that night anymore. Like it had been simmering under the surface for a long time. I turned to him and said, "No, Ronan. I don't think I'm better than you." But clearly, she does. He didn't say anything after that. Just drove us home in silence. That night, he slept on the couch. The days after? We didn't speak much. He'd leave early, come home late, and when he was around, there was a bitterness in the air I couldn't cut through. 2 weeks later, I got an email from Kala. She wanted me to speak at her official startup launch event. A big one. Held at a repurposed industrial building downtown that had been turned into an event space. Tech founders, investors, influencers, the works. She said she admired how I told stories, how I helped companies connect to people. She wanted me to be one of the keynote speakers. I didn't even hesitate. I said yes. The day of the event, Ronan offered to drive me, which surprised me. I asked if he wanted to come inside, and he shook his head. "I'll wait in the car," he muttered. "This isn't really my scene." So while he sat outside, windows cracked, scrolling on his phone or stewing in his thoughts, I walked on stage and told a room full of people about branding, empathy, and connection. I talked about storytelling, about the power of being seen. I was nervous at first, but then I saw Kala in the front row, nodding, and something clicked. I belonged there. When I came back out, Ronan barely looked at me. "Done?" he asked, like I'd just finished a dentist appointment. "Yeah," I said. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't want to know. We didn't speak much that week. Then, over breakfast, 2 scrambled eggs and burnt toast, he dropped it casually, like it was just another chore. "Do you think you could get me a job there?" I blinked. "What?" "At Kala's company." I figured. "I don't know. They probably need logistics people or warehouse setup or something." "I got experience." He didn't look at me. Just kept eating. I didn't answer. Not then. I just watched him, chewing his food like nothing about our lives had just shifted. Like he hadn't spent years minimizing my work, rolling his eyes at my clients, mocking my branding bullsh*t, as he called it. Like he hadn't sat in the car while I stepped into a world he'd always said didn't matter. That morning, something inside me cracked. Not in a loud, dramatic way. Quietly. Fatally. Like a foundation giving way. And from that crack, everything began to change. After that morning, the breakfast, the job request, the silence, I found myself pulling away without even realizing it. It wasn't a grand decision. There was no explosive fight, no suitcase by the door, no dramatic walkout in the rain. It was smaller than that. Quieter. It was me lingering in the car a little longer after errands. Choosing to work from the coffee shop on Division instead of the dining room table. Leaving my phone on Do Not Disturb 4 hours at a time and not feeling guilty. It was the absence of effort. And once that effort stopped, I saw just how much of it had come from me all along. For years, I had been shrinking myself to fit our marriage. I used to filter what I shared with him, downplaying client wins, sugarcoating promotions, avoiding conversations about money because I didn't want to bruise his ego. I stopped talking about the founders I met, or the conferences I was invited to, because every time I did, he'd respond with some comment like, "Must be nice to have time to play pretend with your laptop all day." When you hear that enough times, you start believing that your success is a problem. That ambition is a character flaw. And eventually, you begin to mute parts of yourself just to keep the peace. After that conversation about the job, I started therapy. I didn't tell Ronan. I wasn't hiding it, I just didn't offer it. For the first time in a long time, I needed something to be just mine. I found a therapist named Celine, a soft-spoken woman with sharp questions and an office that smelled like eucalyptus and lemon tea. In our first session, she asked me what I wanted out of therapy. I stared at the wall for a moment, then said, "I don't know. I think I want to stop feeling like I owe someone a smaller version of myself." I went every Tuesday at 6 p.m. It became the 1 hour a week where I could say everything out loud. And the more I said, the more I realized how deeply I had contorted myself to fit into Ronan's world. Meanwhile, at home, things felt stagnant. Ronan seemed to assume that my silence meant things were okay. Or maybe he was too tired to ask. He still went to work, still came home and plopped onto the couch, still watched the same sports shows and grunted through dinner. He never brought up the job again. I never mentioned the launch. It was like it had never happened. One night, I came home late from a client dinner. He was already in bed, facing the wall. I stood there in the doorway for a moment, watching his back rise and fall, and I felt nothing. Not hate, not love. Just the weight of time. The weight of two people who had stopped choosing each other a long time ago and didn't want to admit it. The next morning, I brought it up. I think we need to talk. He didn't look up from his coffee. About what? About us. He finally met my eyes. And what I saw there wasn't fear or sadness. It was resignation. Like he'd been waiting for the conversation too. All right, he said. Talk. So I did. I told him I wasn't happy. That I hadn't been for a long time. That I felt like I'd outgrown the version of our life we were pretending to still be in. That I wasn't blaming him, but I couldn't keep doing it. He nodded. Slowly. Then said, I knew this was coming. That was it. No yelling. No accusations. No begging. Just a man who knew he'd been holding a bird too tight. And finally opened his hands. A week later, he moved out. He took the couch, his tools, some clothes, and one of the dogs, the older one, Bentley, who always followed him around. He moved in with a friend in Beaverton, said he needed time to figure things out. And just like that, the house was quiet. Painfully, beautifully quiet. At first, I didn't know what to do with the silence. It was like standing in a room where someone just stopped playing music and your ears are still ringing. I wandered around the house aimlessly for days, folding and refolding laundry, rearranging bookshelves, wiping down countertops that were already clean. But slowly, the silence became space. And in that space, I found clarity. I started spending more time with Kala. Not just because of her startup, but because being around her reminded me of who I was when I wasn't shrinking myself. We'd go for long walks along the Willamette River, or sit at her kitchen counter drinking tea, talking about everything from algorithms to astrology. She told me, one night, you know he's always been jealous of you, right? I blinked. Jealous? She nodded. Not in the obvious way. But yeah. You became more than he ever expected you to. And that scared the heck out of him. I didn't know what to say to that. A few days later, Kala forwarded me an email. It was from Ronan. He had applied to her company. Sent her his resume and a short message about being interested in helping out in any way. Her message to me simply said, "This you?" I stared at the screen for a long time. The same man who mocked every piece of work I ever did. The same man who sat in a car during my keynote like I was wasting my time. The same man who once said tech people are just pretending to matter, now wanted in. It didn't make me angry. Not anymore. It just confirmed what I'd known for months: he never hated what I did. He just hated that it wasn't his. And maybe, somewhere deep down, he hated that I kept rising, even when he tried to pull me down. I didn't respond to the email right away. I just sat there, staring at it. My laptop was open on the kitchen table, the same spot where Ronan and I used to eat dinner every night. The email sat like a splinter in my inbox, tiny but impossible to ignore. His subject line was polite, exploring opportunities with Kala & Co. The body was short. Generic. He mentioned his years of warehouse management, his ability to work with teams under pressure, and his interest in transitioning into something new. It was professional enough, but I could feel the tension behind every word. He was reaching out not because he believed in the company or its mission, He was reaching because, for once, he realized he was on the outside of something. And suddenly, that mattered to him. I forwarded it to Celine, my therapist. I didn't need her permission, but I needed to know I wasn't crazy for how conflicted I felt. She responded the next day with something simple: "What do you want your role to be in his journey now?" I didn't answer right away, but the question sat with me. Not what do I owe him, or how should I react, but what do I want my role to be? I had never thought of it like that before. I always defaulted to fixing, managing, smoothing things over. This wasn't mine to fix anymore. Later that week, Kala and I met for coffee. She wore a blazer with combat boots, her signature mix of power and rebellion. We sat in a cafe tucked behind a bookstore, a little spot in NW Portland I'd forgotten I loved. We talked about the email. She was blunt, as always. "I won't hire him." I raised an eyebrow. "Even if he could do the job?" "That's not the point," she said. "He doesn't believe in what we do. He just doesn't want to be left behind." And she was right. I hadn't realized it fully until then, but Ronan was never really angry at me for changing. He was angry that the world changed around him and he hadn't kept up. He used to be the center of gravity in our lives. He worked the early shift, set the pace of our days, decided when we'd fix the fence or paint the kitchen. He set the rhythm. Then I started rising. Slowly. Quietly. And the rhythm changed. He didn't know how to dance to it. So instead of learning, he stood still and criticized the music. A few days after that conversation, I finally texted Ronan. It was short. "Kala forwarded me your email. I hope you find something that fits your skills. I think it's good that you're exploring. Take care." He didn't respond right away. When he finally did, all he said was hoping you'd put in a word. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I had nothing else to give him. The guilt I used to carry, about succeeding, about being seen, about outgrowing what we built, it was gone. Or at least, it was quiet. Quieter than it used to be. I started traveling more. Seattle, San Francisco, even a trip to New York for a branding panel. I was invited to speak at 2 more tech events and began mentoring a few young women just starting their careers. I felt alive again. Present. Untethered from the version of myself I used to be when I was constantly shrinking. Meanwhile, Ronan started popping up more often. Not physically, we still didn't see each other in person, but digitally. I'd get occasional messages. A link to a job posting: "You think this would be a good fit for me?" A photo of Bentley, his dog, he misses the backyard. Once, out of nowhere: "You look good in that clip someone posted from the New York event." That one stuck with me. Not because of the compliment, but because I could hear the ache in it. The truth was, I didn't recognize him anymore. Or maybe I did, I just didn't recognize the way I used to accept him. I ran into him once, months after the move. I was walking downtown near Pioneer Courthouse Square after a meeting when I saw him standing in line at a food truck. He hadn't seen me yet. He looked tired. Not older, exactly, but worn in a way I'd never seen. Like someone who kept trying to squeeze into a version of himself that no longer fit. I thought about walking past without saying anything. But I didn't. I approached slowly, said his name. He turned and looked startled, then gave a tight smile. "Hey," he said. "Long time." We talked for a few minutes. Nothing deep. Just surface-level stuff. He asked about my work. I asked about his. He said the warehouse had cut hours again, that things were weird lately. Then he looked down and said, "You seem different." "I am," I replied. He nodded, like he understood, and maybe he did. Before we parted, he said something that stuck with me. "You always had more in you. I just didn't know how to make space for that." It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was close. And for Ronan, that was probably as close as he'd ever come. I walked away feeling something I hadn't expected: peace. Not because we were good, or even friendly. But because I finally saw us clearly. We had loved each other. Once. Maybe not well, maybe not fully, but we had. And then we'd stopped. Love without growth is just habit. And we'd stayed out of habit far too long. The weeks after that unexpected run in downtown passed like fog. The seasons were shifting, and Portland was deep in its usual gray, that endless drizzle that never pours, just clings to everything. I leaned into it. Wrapped myself in sweaters, lit candles, worked late into the night consulting for startups that actually wanted my input. But Ronan's words haunted me: "You always had more in you." I just didn't know how to make space for that. I couldn't deny the weird honesty of it. And yet, there was something in it that almost tried to make me responsible for his failure to grow. It sat in my chest for a while, like a stone I wasn't sure if I should carry or throw. And then came the request. An old colleague from my corporate days reached out. He was starting a new logistics optimization platform. Nothing groundbreaking, but it had solid potential and was picking up buzz. He was looking for a brand strategy lead and needed someone who could build a team from scratch. Total creative control. Big budget. The catch? He wanted me to recommend operations hires too. They were launching a physical wing in Portland for hardware testing. I knew right away. This was it. This was my moment. I said yes. Then I carefully, deliberately, did everything Ronan never did for me. I networked. I searched. I vetted dozens of qualified operations managers and logistics experts, people who were hungry, smart, and didn't roll their eyes when women talked strategy. I built a dream team. Not a single name on it was Ronan's. And I could have slipped his name in. I could have said, "My ex has the experience. Give him a look." But I didn't. Because part of my growth was learning that I wasn't required to extend the same rope to someone who spent years untying mine. The launch happened 3 months later: big event, slick rollout, lots of press. My name was on the program as head of brand strategy. My team made a full experience out of it: interactive booths, custom branding kits, curated panels. People came up to me, shaking my hand, complimenting the execution. I even saw a few former coworkers whispering about how far I'd come. But the real moment came when I walked into the back room to grab my phone. Ronan was there. He wasn't supposed to be. I stood in the doorway, and he turned, just as surprised. "Oh," he said. "Didn't know you'd be here." My voice stayed calm. "This is my event." He blinked. "Wait, your event?" I nodded. "I lead the brand team. The one that created all of this." He looked around the space then, slowly. Took in the custom signage, the crowd, the buzz. The exact kind of world he used to say didn't matter. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then finally, "I applied here. Couple weeks ago. Didn't hear back." I nodded again, slowly. "I know." He blinked, like he didn't understand. I didn't clarify. There was no need. Because that was the moment. Not cruel. Not loud. But devastating in its own quiet way. That was the moment he realized I was not only building a world he didn't understand, I was now deciding who got to enter it. He cleared his throat. Guess I wasn't what they were looking for. I met his eyes. Maybe not. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't angry. It was just real. And he felt it. He nodded, tucked his hands in his jacket, and said, "Well, good for you." Then he turned and walked out. I stood there for a minute after, breathing it in, that clean, sharp air you only get after a long storm finally passes. And it did pass. Since then, I've built more. Traveled more. Spoken on more stages. Mentored women who remind me of who I used to be, bright and buried. I even started a side project with Kala, consulting for female-led startups that need both brand strategy and operations guidance. Every now and then, I get the occasional message from Ronan. A happy birthday, or saw your name on this article, nice work. I don't ignore them, but I don't encourage them either. That chapter closed. Not with a slam, but a slow, steady click.